Hi, I'm Dr. Hackie Reitman, and we're here for another episode of Exploring Different Brains. Today, I'm joined by Dr. William Packard. Bill is a practicing psychotherapist who deals extensively with the topic of neurodiverse and the criminal justice system. Dr. William Packard is the author of Intellectual Disability and the Criminal Justice System. Hello, Bill.
Hey, Hackie. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's good to see you. You know, I'm so excited to be discussing different brains from the aspect of the criminal justice system because there's so many different facets of this coming to light nowadays, and you're one of the world's experts. So introduce yourself to our audience here at Different Brains.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to consider myself an expert. I don't do trial expert testimony, but I have had a lengthy career working with folks in disabilities, mostly developmental disabilities, which has led me into becoming involved with the criminal justice system. So after a 30-some year career, I was changing chapters. I'm also as you said, a psychotherapist, and wanted to semi-retire, whatever that means. And so just the culmination of a long career with a lot of interactions with law enforcement, criminal justice officials, and the penal institutions, I decided to write a book. And so I would call myself a researcher, but mostly I'm a practitioner, and I'm involved in community collaboratives which aim to keep people safe, keep people from entering the criminal justice system, and when necessary to intercept them at various junctures and keep them from penetrating further. So I'm hoping to share more of a community model that I've been involved with for the last 15 years. So expert, not sure I'm an expert, but I guess I know a lot.
Well, you're a modest guy. Now, what I like about what you just said, Bill, is that it's not mutually exclusive. We can protect the community, we can do good for the community, we can intercept, we can help the people who may stray and go afoul a little bit, if I'm hearing you say that also.
Exactly. It's a win-win for everyone, Hackie. The police are thankful, the courts who haven't really known what to do. It's not that they just wanted to prosecute, they just haven't known. There's problems with identification, lack of screening. They're just a host of problems. But when different organizations come together and work together, the job can get done.
Let's talk about, from your point of view, in the community, the first stage, I'm talking an extreme, is the prevention. From your point of view, how do we prevent having everybody end up incarcerated?
Well, there's a lot of good programs happening in a lot of school systems. The DARE program that community police come in, that's mostly drug related. Prevention, think earlier the better. I like the examples of the boys club, girls club, having activities so that there's not too much free time. There's a big problem in what we call the transitioning period from high school to young adulthood, when, pretty much it's been my experience here in Massachusetts that the services are pretty good. There's a lot of inclusion, a lot of activities, a lot of structured activities in the high schools. And then when people become 18 or 21, whenever they leave high school, the activities just completely stop. There's like this gap between the services. So your question, what's the best prevention? Well, lots of recognition that people might be having a difficult time, communication with families, churches, temples, a host of things that where the community needs to come together. Basically, there are a lot of people this is the people that I work with having called the hidden population or the invisible population, meaning that they look just like anyone else and they have special challenges and they have the same vulnerabilities that other people who end up in the criminal justice system have, except that they have more difficulties dealing with these challenges. So any way that people can be recognized as having a special need, maybe needing extra attention, maybe needing to be helped to have some group belonging, have a sense of belonging, anything we can do to help people, vocational help. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but...
No, you are, because now we'll get into the intellectually disabled, or those with intellectual disability, or those with unique talents. How do they fit in to, let's call it your model? We're talking about the Bill Packard model. Now, we ideally, I guess one thing we have to do is have law enforcement be able to recognize those whose brains are a little bit different. Would that be a fair statement?
Yes, but we can't just saddle law enforcement to do that. We need to reach out to law enforcement. Those of us who work with people who have challenges in a way that's helpful, not to identify somebody as, a potential perpetrator or, somebody who's engaging in petty crimes, but to work informally with community police. And it really comes down to sharing communication, sharing information. I know there's a lot of serious misunderstandings about sharing such information, but there's with HIPAA, but it really doesn't preclude sharing information with law enforcement and court officials, not to prosecute, but to help educate people on positive options and to, avoid the negative.
Well, I mean, if I'm a policeman, I want to at least know what some of the hallmarks are of, let's just pick out autism and Asperger's, okay?
Right.
So that I can have some kind of recognition factor. If I get a call and have to deal with somebody whose brain might be a little bit different, I want to be able to recognize some of the hallmarks a bit so that I don't misjudge them or take inappropriate action.
One of the things I do, Hackie, is I'm a co-founder and an active participant in an organization called Community Crisis Intervention Team. And on the team, there's a number of police, court officials, clinicians, educators, administrators. And one of the things we do is we conduct twice a year, 3-day trainings for police, not specifically. This is taken after another model that many people have heard of, crisis intervention team, which came out of Memphis in the early 90s as a result of an unfortunate shooting of a mentally ill man that police didn't know was experiencing hallucinations. So we have taken our model and it's similar to the CIT model, crisis intervention, but we've added community because we need to foster, not only teach police officers the signs and symptoms of mental illness and developmental disability and neurodiverse, folks and how they might present, whether it's spectrum or, we have a 3-day training. I do the component on mental health, mental illness, and developmental disabilities. That includes spectrum and Asperger's. There's a lot of training specifically on Asperger's or spectrum folks for police, but we have a more kind of eclectic approach. So part of it is training. Part of it is reaching out. The trainings are completely free. The evaluations we get from the police are fantastic. We very importantly include other types of professionals in the classes, so the police actually start meeting people in their own communities, therapists, substance abuse clinicians, court officials, pastors, citizens of all sorts. I'm forgetting tons and tons of people. And the whole idea is not just is obviously to help, this is the problem. I didn't know what you have, know what you're working with, know what you're seeing. It may appear criminal, but it may be a mental health disturbance, or could be related to another type of disability. We call that criminalizing, where it's an offensive behavior. It's not a criminal offense. So we teach that. We teach some of the hallmark characteristics of somebody with a developmental disability, for example, how they might identify them. And importantly, we give them the resources and the numbers to call when they're interacting with folks on the street. I had mentioned that we like to include a host of professionals in these classes so people start talking to one another. We first use the concept networking, where, we're trying to develop a network of collaterals and professionals who can, we realize the term networking is not sufficient. Partnering is the word we use now. So these 3-day trainings, for example, the primary goal is to help identification, help know what resources are available, and when possible, to use diversion from the criminal justice system. Just as important is the establishing relationships that people can actually use in their jobs. And I guess just to, police don't really like to sit down for 3 days at a time. So we do mix it up. We use exercises. We have a field trip. We have a segment on auditory hallucinations where the police actually wear headphones of somebody having auditory hallucinations, and we have them go through several tasks so that they can have a greater empathy or appreciation. I've been trying to come up with something similar for someone, say with Asperger's, so that, they can try to have the experience of being in their shoes. One thing that comes out of these trainings is that everybody is psyched. People leave with each other's numbers. And I think I'm forgetting the actual question, but
that's all right. No, this is all good. This is the way you do it. You get everybody involved. You get everybody talking to each other.
Yes.
You get the law enforcement involved with other community people there, and familiarity and understanding makes things a lot safer and better all around.
That's right.
What are some of the issues that you've seen arise when the neurodiverse individual comes in contact with the criminal justice system?
If I have time to give a short history of how I got involved, I think it might explain some of the things that I've noticed and come aware of. I started in 1978 at a state school for developmentally disabled adults, and it was a time of deinstitutionalization, and there were lots of people who had been secluded from society, were by reason of court mandates and court decrees, were literally being forced back into the community. The same thing happened with mentally ill patients at state hospitals throughout the country. So most of the infractions, so we actually, saw what was actually coming. The evolution of the community crisis intervention team actually started when the police started calling me and having me come to the front gate to retrieve somebody that had shoplifted or had a negative interaction with a store clerk, or just, said something inappropriate and there was a complaint. And maybe I'm going too much into this. The police basically said, look, you guys have to teach these people, or you need to have somebody with them. So that wasn't happening. So I actually made some calls, first called the police chief. He was sympathetic, but he said, talk to the probation chief, talk to him, who sent me to the local judge, who sent me to a man who was working at the Mass Bar Association, Alex Muscella. Alex and I developed an educational forum, almost like a mock trial, to be used to stay out of the legal system, but to try to impart a knowledge and appreciation of consequences for these individuals. And well, we had a meeting finally with our local officials, and it was a no-go. The public defender's woman said we were violating people's rights just by virtue of being in the same room with law enforcement. So, long way of getting to your question. I later took a job as a community psychologist and was amazed at the other end, out in the community, how many people in my caseload were actually involved in the criminal justice system. Some were adjudicated, some were awaiting trials, some were in detention, some were serving lengthy prison sentences. One thing that was common amongst all of them is that they were naive offenders. Many of them were naive offenders. Many of them really didn't know what they were getting involved in. Many of them, and some of the characteristics of somebody with developmental disabilities is you're maybe a little gullible, easily manipulated, searching for a sense of belonging, highly suggestible. You tend to acquiesce to what others tell you or try to give them the right answer. You'll do anything for acceptance. So there's what I call a perfect storm that can happen. You started the interview by talking about, older adolescents who, hopefully we can channel in the right directions and help with employment and so forth. But these individuals are basically easily led. The biggest problems I saw when I was in the community and definitely when I was researching for my book was that they're not on a equal playing field as anyone else. So let's say the police, are called to a certain location and there's this guy that's looks like he's showing inappropriate affect and behavior, and he's just they ask him some questions and he looks like he's copying this attitude and saying I don't know. Well, actually he doesn't want to let on that he really doesn't know what's going on, and he is in over his head, and maybe somebody has asked him to stand there and be a patsy and watch out for them, or quite often these people are the people that are left holding the bag, so to speak. They're the last to leave the scene of a crime, first to confess, and most likely to be prosecuted. And that speaks to their executive functioning problems and lack of knowledge and experience. So, I could go on and on explaining some of the traits and characteristics, of which there are many, which make this a serious problem. The most serious problem is the deeper you get into the criminal justice system, the more serious the matter. So even on a police interview, because of problems with memory and the tendency to acquiesce, and definitely police who use the read technique in terms of interrogating people, good cop, bad cop, listen, just help us out. We know you did it. Just tell us and we'll let you go. We can help you if you're honest with us. Those type of, although, a good thing for your common criminal when the police are trying to interrogate, It's just totally, totally counterindicated for our folks. There's an excellent Netflix documentary, Making of a Murderer, where which exemplifies this. So I would ask everyone to watch that. You would definitely understand all the terrible things that can happen, the travesties of justice, and specifically a young man, Brendan Daisies, the full police interrogation of a man who's probably functioning with an IQ of 50, 55, totally being misled, and now he's serving a lengthy prison sentence, and it's pretty clear he had nothing to do with it. There are many examples of this.
Do you have a guess as to what percentage of the incarcerated population, the people in jails and prisons, what percentage of them might have neurodiverse or different brains, whatever the labels might be, if you add them all up?
Well, it's, to the best of my knowledge, it's way over 50% if your sampling is inclusive. So for intellectually disabled folks, there's 2 to 3% of the population. The best estimates in the penal system, people being held not just for trial, but serving prison sentences, the estimates are around 10 to 12%. However, there's this whole other area of non-identified people. Those are people that we know about. People who have marginal, or we used to call it borderline intelligence, just for the sake of coming up with some numbers, say from 70 to 85, IQ 70 to 85. If you added them to the group of incarcerated, you're jumping up to 35 to 40%. If you add people with higher intelligence still, but learning disabilities, and I would add to that list people with Asperger's, and together with that, any type of learning challenge or disability, it's way in excess of 50%.
If we're dealing with roughly half of the whole prison population who have different brains, neurodiverse, if you add all up all the different labels, and we take the position that I think the statistic for the percent of prisoners who actually get back out into society, I think it's something like 95%, something like that at some point.
They're coming back to the same communities that they left, and quite often they're coming back better criminals. I mean, I'm sure everybody's aware of some recent legislation, efforts to support treatment over incarceration, or at least to minimize, nonviolent felony incarcerations. So basically, but for somebody with issues and with a need to try to fit in and pass as a normal inmate, they're very unlikely to accept any type of rehabilitation that's there for fear of looking and showing their deficits and
being stigmatized and taken advantage of.
Exactly.
Now let's move to the staff. What percentage of the staff would you say, because we all know in the general population at any place of work, X% are going to be a little bit different. Again, whether it's ADHD, whether it's Asperger's, whatever you want to call it, is it, in your opinion, higher or lower than the general population? Or just give a guesstimate of what percentage of the staff do you think might be on the spectrum?
It would be a huge guesstimate. I really couldn't. What would you say? What's your experience been?
My experience in regular life, as I look around my office here, I don't know how I would have been labeled. I got expelled once in the first grade, once in the 10th grade. I can't seem to focus on very much. But I'm going to guesstimate in today's world, we're looking at a good solid 5%. I would say 1 out of 20 people has a really meaningful label of some kind, if they were to be diagnosed and everything.
You see, I would have been up in the 30 to 40%. That's why I guess it's really how we define.
It's how you define it. Because I believe if you add up all of the different types of, quote, labels or neurodiversities, that the so-called neurotypical is in the minority. In the general population, I don't have statistical proof of that, and again, it depends on how you define it, but I would imagine it would be very safe to say very conservative to say between 5 and 30% of the correctional guard staff has something, okay?
Definitely, there's a lot of substance abuse problems. There's obviously some characterological problems of some officers. Some are fantastic. But there's this a certain mentality that can be pervasive. There's this huge debate today about where with the private prison systems and the money-making prison systems. They call it the industry, the penal industry. It's like a money-making thing. Not to get political, but there's a huge over-reliance on prisons, and you hear about it with the drug-related, nonviolent charges today. And fortunately, there's less and less of that. People do better when they're in smaller environments, and it's more geared towards, it's tailored to their own personal abilities and needs. So somebody neurodiverse, somebody who's challenged in any way, mentally or emotionally, they really, I'm being opinionated, but they really aren't going to do well and are probably going to come out of prison a lot worse. So there are alternatives. There is community treatment centers in the same communities the individuals will come back to, where their families are, where they can be transitioned and back into a hopefully more successful life. I don't know. I'm not here to make any negative statements about correctional officers. There are wonderful correctional officers. There are wonderful police. There mostly people want to do a good job. There are always bad apples.
Well, there's bad apples in doctors. I'm an MD. There's bad apples in anything. But if we look at this another way for a minute,
sure.
Let's say you and I we get a meeting with a very large, successful, money-making private prison system. And we get to their leadership, and Bill Packard and Hackie Reitman walk in, and we say to them, look, guess what? If you embrace neurodiversity and recognize it, and you let us come in and train your staff and the inmates, you're going to make more money. You're going to get good press. You're going to be in compliance with the newly emerging EEOC laws on neurodiversity and so forth. And, you'll be doing the right thing, but don't do it for that reason. Do it to make more money. Let us come in and show you how we can do that. Is that possible to do?
It's a novel idea, and I'm all for it. Show me the way.
If we maximize everybody's potential, whether they're a guard or any kind of staff in a prison, and the prisoners themselves to be more productive and more independent, if you will, in a positive fashion, and more lined up for what happens when you get out of prison.
Right, which is important.
Very important, because they're all going to get out.
The recidivism rate is you know, it's terrible for a lot of the folks we work with. So I would even prioritize starting with people who are most vulnerable and most not on a fair playing field, as it were, you know, coming out of prison, and try to, you know, you come out of prison, you have a felony charge, it's hard to get a job. Start with people who are most down on their luck and are having the hardest time, you know, reintegrating into society.
I was in solo practice, and then I ended up founding this kind of a huge orthopedic group back in the day. And ultimately, we had like 5 offices in 3 counties, and we were acquired by a publicly traded company. And I was able to convince the suits from the corporation, as things evolved, and the doctors and the nurses and the staff and the patients all around one table, that if you treat every patient like it's your own family, the patient's happier, the doctor's happier, the staff is more fulfilled, and the suits make more money. Okay? It's not, we always think things are mutually exclusive, and they're not, you know? They're really not. You can figure these things out. I think anyway. I think you can.
It's a win-win-win.
Win-win-win, and that's the way I try to look at things, because it's not a zero-sum game. If the prisoner does better and becomes a productive citizen, and the guards feel better about themselves, and the behavior overall improves, and the litigation goes down, and the fights and problems inside go down, all right? You're going to make more money. Makes more sense. The only negative would be if your recidivism rate goes down, which it will, then how are you going to replace that income? And we'll move them into outpatients, so to speak. We'll get them moving into the halfway.
There's a saying that a little money up front saves a lot of money down the road. And I think that applies here.
That's very well said, Bill. It's about thinking clearly the way you are in the community and getting everybody on the same side. Like you said, people come out of those meetings and they get in touch with each other. And why? They finally got exposed to each other. So that's what you do.
You people need to know what limitations each other have, you know, in terms of their role, responsibilities, and recognize that they can both be helpful to one another. There are things that limits on the job that I have where somebody who's in another capacity can, make up for my job limitation and vice versa. So yeah, it's like,
we'll have some fun with this. We'll have some fun.
They're very good.
And you certainly have devoted your life to this with your book, The Intellectual Disability and the Criminal Justice System. How do people get a hold of that book, Bill?
I have sent a couple of links to the Amazon.com and to CreateSpace.com. You can find it on Amazon. By the way, that's the first part of the title of the book, Intellectual Disability and the Criminal Justice System. The second part is the part that's exciting, Solutions Through Collaboration, which is everything that we're talking about today. So I'd be very happy for people to take a look at the book, and it's.
And how do they get a hold of you, Bill? How do they get a hold of you?
The website for the book, and there's the first chapter of the book and the clinical resources. There's a pretty involved website, Intellectual Disability and the Criminal Justice System. Is it .com or solutionsthroughcollaborations.com? Can I make one more suggestion?
Absolutely.
There's a great model for communities to consider if they find any relevancy to problems that they're experiencing in their community, and if they think a community collaborative approach is the way to go. The group that I'm involved in is the Taunton Community Crisis Intervention Team, and the website is http //CCITTAUTONMA.weebly.com. We're always wanting to share information, and we are somewhat of a clearinghouse of information, and give people suggestions. You know, there is no cookie cutter, one fits, size fits all for community collaboratives. But, we're committed to sharing our experiences over the last 15 years. And we're also always wanting to learn from other communities. So I would, as much as I'd like people to visit my book website, I'm even more excited about people thinking about a community collaborative for themselves, for their communities.
Well, that's great. We just interviewed one of your #1 fans who's in your community up there, who does so much. Sorry, go ahead.
Who was that?
You tell me who it was. Tell me who your #1 fan up there was, who we just interviewed.
My #1 fan. Okay, just occurred. Mari Nosel.
Absolutely. She has nothing but great things to say about you.
Yeah, she went through our program, and she's very involved.
She's amazing. She is really amazing, and she's been through a few things herself.
She's been instrumental in helping me understand, this is something that we're always learning, that the book that I wrote applies to people with Asperger's. I use the term intellectual disability because that's the certain population I was assigned to work with as a psychologist, but never realizing that all the people with marginal and even up to above average intelligence have the same vulnerabilities if they have certain traits and characteristics, and the same clinical logic applies to everyone. So yes, kudos to Mari for helping me understand that it's an all-inclusive topic.
Bill, what training is currently available to judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officers?
I'm actually part of a organization. It's the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability. It's out of the National ARC. Again, it's the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, using a grant from the Department of Justice. And they are actually looking for communities who want to spearhead an approach to train. We do it on a very sporadic basis. Well, we'll get together with public defenders and try to do an in-service, or judges, by the way, really want to do the right thing if they only had the time. And so a lot of what we're talking about preventatively will unclog the court system and allow them to do their job better. But if you go to this website, the National Center on Criminal Justice and Disability, you'll find it's a clearinghouse of trainings for that, for lawyers, prosecutors, public defenders, judges, court officers, penal, institution professionals. There's a lot, and of course, police, the first line of, who are basically psychiatrists by default. They're screening everyone because they have first contact. So it's, I think that's a very good lead in terms of finding out what is going on and becoming part of that particular collaborative.
That brings us to the end of another episode of Exploring Different Brains with Dr. Hackie Reitman here. That's me. But the guy who really knows a lot of stuff we just heard, Dr. William Packard, the author of Intellectual Disability and the Criminal Justice System. Bill, thanks again. Keep up the good work.
You got it. Thank you, Hackie.
We've been speaking with Dr. William Packard, the author of Intellectual Disability and the Criminal Justice System. For more information, visit us at differentbrains.com.